Hi, everyone. My name is Angela Crozier with Solution Enablement, and today's session is on data conversion. Thank you for joining, where our focus will be on merchandising and pricing. I do want to let you know that we are recording this session so that we can have a playback for everyone that misses it. And we also will take questions at the end. We ask that you keep yourself on mute, and you will be able to ask questions through the chat line. So right now, I'd like to turn it over to Amy Selby. Amy?
Great, thanks Angela, and thanks for everyone for joining. Like Angela said, we're going to be talking about data conversion today for the cloud service, focused mostly on merchandising and pricing. So we'll talk about data conversion kind of in two ways. One is more the process, which I think as system integration partners, you're probably familiar with that. And in a lot of ways, conceptually, it's similar in cloud as it was on premise in terms of some of the things that need to be done in order to get our customers' data prepped and ready to be loaded into merchandising solutions. And then we'll also talk about the tooling that's available within the merchandising solutions to help with that data conversion process. So just to start off by kind of level setting on data conversions, there's kind of, I guess, maybe two components that are going to happen. The first is more seed data related, or kind of some basic configuration. As part of the provisioning process, there will be some questions that will be asked of our customers, and likely you'd be helping them with answering some of those in terms of some of the basic configuration of how the solutions get created. For merchandising, that includes things like primary language and what other languages need to be loaded, some of the system options that have some that have limitations on being able to be changed after initial go live, and that type of thing. There may also be some additional, there's also some additional seed data that's loaded, things like calendar, country codes, what are the available languages that you want to use in the solution. And those all can be configured, to limit which ones are applicable for the customer. Those will all happen as part of the initial provisioning process, kind of in front of what we're going to be talking today about, which is more the legacy data conversion process, which is what I'm calling here functional conversion. So what is the process used to extract legacy data from our customer solutions and load them into the merchandising suite? Now, we did talk, I think, in the first session a little bit about a customer who's maybe on an older version of merchandising and is doing, so it's almost more of an upgrade. And that there is some tooling available from our ORC team, or Oracle Retail Consulting. I'm not going to really talk about that today. So this will be more focused on either net new customers or customers where that conversion tool isn't really an option for one reason or another. So generally with merchandising, we see conversion happening in, or I should say merchandising cloud service, we're seeing data conversion happening in kind of one or two phases, either everything being converted over at once, which is sometimes referred to as Big Bang, or happening kind of in two phases, the first of which are foundation and item and pricing, and then the second phase being more the transactional data, purchase orders, inventory transactions, that type of thing. The boxes at the top of the slide here are showing kind of the typical breakout of kind of the lowest level of detail, I guess, we see conversion happening, but generally it's some grouping of these functions. So typical data conversion process, which again, I would expect most of you are familiar with this, but I think it's worth kind of reinforcing that even in a cloud implementation, these steps are still needed. So the first three steps here are things that really are going to be on the side of the system implementation teams, or the implementation team's responsibility, and that is cleansing data and legacy, So that's either, you supporting your customer or the customer doing this on their own, which might mean, cleaning up and purging old inactive data in their legacy systems, closing open transactions where they can be, and doing other standardization of data. So often talking with customers, they have maybe not as consistent of data management in their old solutions, and as much as possible, it's helpful to be able to cleanse and clean up that data in legacy before you start trying to extract and transform it. Next, two phases kind of go together, extract and transform. So this is where the build portion of conversion generally happens on a implementation project. So building those programs to extract data from legacy and in a way that can be used in the conversion process, and then defining what that transformation logic needs to look like to get the data from legacy to be able to be loaded into merchandising. And that may mean defining defaulting logic or other kinds of transformation. And then the last phase is load, and that's where the tool that we have as part of our solution can be used, as well as it can be supplemented with some custom processes for areas that maybe aren't covered, or if you have a different way that data needs to be loaded based on your customer's data profile. So what is the data conversion tool? Some of you maybe have looked at it already or have heard about it. This is a way to take data, to load data in DAT files from legacy and load it into a pre-production environment so that you can test and validate the data and kind of practice the conversion process. And then it ultimately would be a way to do that final cutover from all the way from legacy into production at the end. So it's a tool to help support that. It accounts for a lot of the validation and data integrity and business validation logic that we need to ensure that the data goes through before it gets loaded into the merchandising tables. The tool itself we'll do a demo of here in a bit. Does have some reporting and monitoring capabilities as well. You can see an example of that here on this slide. The idea being to help you see some of the common errors that are coming through as you're doing your practice runs, and that's to help you point to where you may need to make some corrections in your transformation logic or the extract logic that's being used to create the files that are loaded. And the whole idea being that these practice runs, of course, would give you a smooth conversion at the end of the day with no errors. So this is the general scope of what the conversion tool supports today in terms of data conversion. A lot of it is foundation data, and then some support for pricing. From a transactional perspective, we don't have a lot of the entities supported. And a lot of that is because the general expectation is that as much as possible, transfers, RTVs, things that are within the retailer's control will be closed in legacy and completed in legacy and then held for a brief period of time during the conversion cutover so that there's less risk with all the data kind of being in two places at once, perhaps different IDs being used across solutions, that type of thing. So that's really kind of why we focused our scope of what we built out on what we did. A couple areas that we often get questions on with regard to conversion because of some of the complexities, and it will definitely depend on what's going on in your customer's environment. But the first is related to supplier and partner conversion, particularly if your customer is using RFI or Oracle Retail Financial Integration with PeopleSoft, EBS, or Cloud Financials. And part of the complexity there is that for one, the RFI integration is generally only in the production environment or it's only hooked up with cloud financials, for example, in the production environment and not in the environment where you're doing all the other data conversion. And the way RFI works is that the supplier IDs and supplier site IDs that are coming over from financials are used to populate a cross-reference in the integration layer. And the ID that actually is used in merchandising is not the same ID that's in financials. So to support that, the slide here is kind of showing what our recommendation is in terms of how that could be converted. And generally what we've recommended, and I think we've had a couple customers do successfully, is to run the supplier and partner initialization script in production. That's something that's part of RFI. I can't remember right now if it's a cloud financials job or if it's something that's in our integration layer. I know it's documented in our implementation guide. But that's used to seed over all the supplier and partner data that's needed into the merchandising database. So we recommend that gets run in production once you're starting to work through your conversion processes. That will populate the cross-reference and generate the IDs that are needed for supplier and any partners that are getting pulled over. And then that data can be extracted from production and used to enrich with the merchandising specific attribution that's required on the dev environment side, including creating partners. So partners always get integrated over as suppliers in that RFI integration and have to be created using the same ID as a partner on the merchandising side. So you would do all of that in the pre-production environment, and then that supplier data would get loaded along with all the other converted data, and eventually during that final lift and shift over to production, it would overlay what had been in production. But at this point, the IDs and things are all synced up. So a couple key assumptions on that. Like I mentioned, generally speaking, RFI and financials are only available in your customer's production environment. And even if it is available in pre-production, the seeding process and integration layer doesn't really have a migration path. So the running of those processes in the pre-production environment doesn't easily translate over to what will ultimately be in production. There may be a need to load a few of the dependent items like payment terms or units, freight terms in production as well to support that initial load. But those are generally pretty slow moving data points, so could be done quite early in the process. And there may also need to be a hold on creating any new suppliers kind of during that conversion window. Obviously, that can be difficult to control, but sort of like other inventory movement transactions in that final cutover window, you may want to ensure that those are held, and something to discuss at least with your customers. Another area that's a little bit unique in terms of how the data gets set up is pricing. So there's a couple aspects of it. First is the regular price conversion. So as part of the conversion tool load, it supports being able to load zone price, so the item zone price table, and then also converts new item locations, which would inherit that zone price. And then it supports the ability to do any kind of update at the item location if you have any exceptions for your items outside of the zone pricing. And then there's a final process that needs to be run. It can be run in the, I think it can be run in the pre-production environment to seed that future retail table within the pricing cloud service, so that future price changes and clearance can be processed successfully once the final conversion happens. That happens outside the tool. It's a scheduled job in the batch scheduler. And there's details on all of this information that we're going through today also in our conversion guide, which I've got a link to at the end of the deck as well, in terms of how to schedule it and the name of the program here. So if you need to convert any other pricing data besides kind of initializing that regular price, for example, if you have items that will be on clearance at the time of cutover, there's also a process to do that. The clearance is set up to be going into effect, I think, the day of the cutover, essentially, and then sets the clearance price in merchandising as well as the clearance flag. Any future clearance events can be loaded using our bulk upload processes. Similar with promotions, we don't really have a promotion component to the conversion tool, but we do have a bulk load that can be used. So if there are any ongoing promotions, they can be set up to have the effective date of cutover and whatever is the appropriate end date, so that can transition over for any ongoing promotions that are occurring at the time of cutover. So talked a little bit about some of the data that is supported. Again, all the details on the specific tables that are supported you can find in the conversion guide. But there are some entities that aren't included and may be needed as part of your conversion for your customer. And this slide here tries to outline a few things that can be considered to help support that. So in all of our non-production environments that are used for conversion, you'll have read-write access to the database. So you can create custom scripts that can be run. You can also leverage our spreadsheet uploads or induction processes within the merchandising schema that's in that pre-production environment. Or you could potentially leverage RIB or other APIs if you have RICs in that pre-production environment, or they could be loaded into production as well once the other data is loaded. That's dependent on that. For non-merchandising suite data, so if you have any other solutions, Oracle Retail Solutions in particular, that are going live around the same time as merchandising, the recommendation is to do the merchandising conversion first. And then we have a number of bulk data integration processes that can be used in a seed mode to convert data that is needed from merchandising into those other solutions. So SIM or SIOX is a common solution to implement with merchandising. There are a number of BDI scripts that are run to seed and initialize the data in SIM for go live. Same with our planning solutions, Oracle Retail's order management and order broker. RI is a little bit different. We have a different set of integrations that are used, but there's also a seed process that can be used to load RI. Okay, so then in terms of the tool, I find this diagram helpful to kind of visualize what the process would look like. So starting on the left-hand side there, you can see the files coming in from legacy. They're SFTP'd over to the development or pre-production environment that you'll be using for conversion processing. And then they're loaded into the conversion schema using the tool, which we'll demo here in a minute. And that tool will go through a series of validations against the data and loads it into the merchandising schema in the development environment. And then there's a process where you can kind of iterate on that as you build up the data sets that you're running through that tool. So presumably starting off maybe smaller, trying to work through some of the issues when you're kind of test out your extract and transform logic. And then once you're ready to do the final lift and shift, that's something that's done in coordination with our cloud operations team. And they'll take the full schema in the development environment and overlay production. Now, they have a kind of a process for that. It's been used a number of times with our customers. It does take the entire schema, so that's why if you have additional data that you need to load in that's not supported by the conversion schema, you can load that directly into that pre-production merchandising schema, and it will be included in the overall conversion. In terms of roles and responsibilities, we've talked about this with some of the other areas in these sessions. Most of the responsibilities are, again, on the system integrator and customer side, in terms of planning what data needs to be converted, what is the conversion strategy. If you're going to use the conversion tool, that's something that you'll need to coordinate with the cloud operations team. There is a separate URL sent, or that would need to be acquired for that in your pre-production environment. I think currently the process is that you have to request a specific environment where you want the tool loaded, but going forward, we're looking at moving to automatically including that data conversion application in all the pre-production environments, so it doesn't have to be requested specifically. But in the short term, you'll need to specify which environment you want it loaded in, especially if your customers have more than one pre-production environment. In terms of the planning and designing the conversion strategy, that's something else you'll want to coordinate with the cloud operations team so that they understand your timing and can help you plan their capacity to support that. We talked about the cleansing of data, the building, extract, and transformation programs, importing the legacy data files via SFTP. That's all done on the conversion application side. And then, of course, the validation of data would be the responsibility of the project team. On the final day of cutover, again, that's something the cloud operations team would support, doing that extract and then load into production, sometimes referred to as lift and shift. And then, the project team obviously would be responsible for validating the data on the production side after that occurs to make sure everything looks okay. To help kind of get a jump start on the conversion process, there is an offline file validator tool that can be downloaded. It's available on my Oracle support, and it does some of the same validations against the data that are done in the tool. So this is something that might be able to be helpful or be able to be used maybe while you're waiting for your provision environments to be available. You can get a jump start on trying to validate how close the data is in your customer's legacy solutions, or start pre-validating some of your processes that are built for the extract and transformation. It's something that's loaded locally in a customer's on-prem environment to do that. So it doesn't require any of the cloud environments to be able to use. And then just one other thing here before I turn it over to Mega to do the demo. The conversion tool itself, it is a separate URL, like I mentioned, for access, because it's considered something that's somewhat temporary while you're in the go live process. And it does have its own roles and privileges. So those are listed here in terms of what things within the tool people have access to. So you may have some people that you want to give full access to, where they can run some of the mock conversion, which cleans up the environment, whereas others you may want to just have them in there looking at errors and kind of evaluating the outcomes of the runs. Okay. All right, Mega, I'm going to stop sharing here so I can turn it over to you to do the demo. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Amy. So hi, I'm Megha. I'm part of the merchandising co-development team. So Amy, could you please confirm if my screen is visible?
Yep, we can see it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So to start off, we'll walk through a brief demo of the conversion application. So prior to proceeding with the conversion, my first step would be to prepare my input data files. So these are the files that contain data from your legacy application transformed to a format that is expected from the conversion tool, which later can be picked up for loading into the RMS application. So how do I go about with this building of the data files? Especially it gets a little complicated with our complex RMS data model, the changing versions. So to help with this, we have a couple of utilities. One is we would be providing templates for each and every entity that is enabled for conversion. So this is the set of templates that is available. This template can be downloaded directly from the online application, conversion application. Let me just open this. So you would see something like this. For our demonstration, we would be walking through a simple load of departments. So let me just pick my department template and show you how it looks like. So this is the template. It basically explains the structure of how your input data file should look like. So here I'm specifying what is the pattern, file naming pattern to be followed. What are the columns that should be there in the file? It also mentions what is the sequence of these columns, that is important. And another part would be the data type, the size of each field, all this is called out. Additionally, along with that, we also mention the basic rules underlying this table. These are the database rules like the primary key check constraint, the referential constraint. All this is called out in this constraint. So as part of the implementation team, I should be using this template for reference and then performing the mapping against the legacy systems data, writing transformation logic using ETL tools, and finally generating the equivalent expected data files that can be consumed by our application. So here is an example of the file that I would have generated. I'm abiding to all the rules called out over here, and let's see how that goes forward. So Amy also mentioned about a helper utility called the offline validator. So as and when I'm writing my templates, as I'm writing my transformation logic, I would like to use that offline validator. So this is a simple jar. It's a desktop application that can be downloaded from support. You can have it on your desktop, just run it, verify, doing a pre-check kind of thing, and it will call out maximum errors as possible. Then you can go back, correct your transformation, and regenerate your files. So that eases your whole conversion because you wouldn't want to iteratively push your files again, make correction. So the offline validator would be something that as a useful tool in your pre-load stage. So this is a file that I have generated. My next step would be to move this file onto the host conversion application. This is hosted on my cloud service. So how do I move that? This would be through SFTP. The cloud operation team will be sharing the details of how you can push this file. So you will be using it and pushing it through the client where it will be moved and will be placed on the host machine where my conversion online application would be deployed. So the tool can directly pick this file and start processing. So in my case, I would be walking through the application. This application is just hosted in one of our internal environments. So my file is ready for upload, and let me show you how I would be going about with loading the simple department file. So in my file, I am trying to load department IDs from 4040 on to 4140, approximately about 103 records I have on this file. Assuming I'm walked it through the initial offline validator, next step would be to start with the conversion to the tool. So my file is available on my upload directory. So the tool takes you through three phases: import, data validate, and business validation. Let's go through each of these. So my first one would be import from file. I choose, we have a hierarchical grouping between these entities. This is called out in our documentation. It would also be later coming out as a screen format for you to gain information on this. So in my case, I'm trying to load department. So I would choose merchandising hierarchy, choose my department. And over here, you can see that my file is listed. So this is where your file pattern is important. The tool automatically will list only those files which match the specified pattern. So I pick this, give a description, and then click on import from file. So in this case, I have my entity requires a DAT file, but there are certain entities which require a zip file as an input. So when would it require a zip file? When there are multiple multiple files to be processed together, where there is interdependencies, and in these cases, our input would be a zip file. So in this stage, what has happened is our tool has gone, as if it's a zip, it would have unzipped the file, extracted the DAT files, and then it reads through each and every record in your file and then loads it onto staging table. These staging tables are available in the conversion schema. This is not on the main RMS schema. These staging tables are there on the conversion schema. So while doing so, I can see we provide the basic statistics of how your load has gone. So as we had seen, there were 103 records in my file. Unfortunately, only 101 have gone through and 2 have failed. So what is the reason of the failures? That is listed over here. Let me just open it further. So in case the errors are clearly called out at a row and a column level. So it says that row number 90, department, there's a numeric or a value error. So in this phase, primarily the errors that are caught are the data type mismatches and the size mismatches. So let's verify whether there was a flaw in this. So row number 90, yes. So this is the culprit over here. There are some characters that have gone in place of a numeric value. And the next one that it told me was 91. So in 91, I see that again, in place of numeric values, there are some characters due to which it has errored out. And these errors are clearly called out in this section. So in case you have a huge number of errors coming out and it's difficult on the UI to scan through that, you can use the export to Excel feature. This is similar. You would have already noticed the same thing in our RMS, in the later versions of RMS when it has moved to the ADF. So you click on export to Excel. And I'll just open another file that is the same thing. So it comes out with a pattern like this. So here it calls out 90. This was another file, department, and it has mentioned that there were a numeric or a value error has come out on this record. Apart from this, so how do I go about with correcting this? I can use this Excel as a reference, go back to my source file, make correction, and I may choose to reload it, or I can go back to my transformation logic, regenerate the whole file and load the whole file together. I may choose that, or among this 101, couple of them have failed. The successfully loaded ones could be taken through with the remaining conversion, and I can choose to load the failed records later. So there is an option called download failed data. So what this does is, it pulls out only the erroneous records. So in my case, those 2 errors were there and those have been caught over here and pulled out. So where this would come to help is, in case you're loading a huge file, 1,000, 10,000 odd entries, and some 40, 50 odd entries have randomly errored out here and there. So it would be tedious to manually go there, pull those entries out, make a correction, reload it. So in that case, you can directly use this option, download only the failed records. It will definitely come out in the pattern that it is expected from the tool. So if it was a zip input, then your output also would, whatever is downloaded would come in a zip format, which you can directly correct and then reload it. So this is my first stage where I have moved the data from the file onto the staging tables. The next step would be to do a round of data validation. So these are compulsory steps that it has to go through. I key in the same process, what I gave. At this moment, it loads whatever was the current status of this. Once done, I can click on validate data. So this is the phase where it performs a round of data validation. By data validation, these are the validations which are within the purview of a single file. These are primarily the check constraint, the mandatory checks are covered in this phase. So in my case over here, I had about 101, among which 98 had passed through data validation and 3 again, unfortunately, have failed. So let's see what the errors are. So over here it says it has failed on a few fields. It calls out telling on it's, if you notice over here, the errors are at the row and the column, both are caught at the same time. Doesn't do one error at a time, you make a correction, another error, so it tries to call out everything together. So it says department is not null. So when department was mandatory, I've not filled it in, and that is why it has reported an error. Going back to the file, this says row number 94 department name, both have been missing, and that's why the error was thrown. So couple more things over here. These were the graphical reporting representation reports that Amy had also discussed upon. So it gives me a brief of how much went through on each phases, how many error. The other useful report over here would be the top errors. So how it comes to use is, you know that a bulk of errors have come out due to department name missing. Then you know there's something really wrong in your transformation logic. That makes it easier to go back and get these common errors corrected at the first place. So once my data validation is done, my next step would be to run through the business validations. So what are the validations covered here? Here we are trying to enforce all possible validation as it would have been if you had loaded through the screen. So if I'm creating a department from screen, what all validation you would be enforced upon, the same validation, almost all the same set of validations are covered in this phase. So why is that necessary? This becomes very much important at a later phase. So in case you're directly trying to make an insert into the table, there is a chance that you might have missed a check beyond that of a database check. And this generally comes up at a later stage. You might have an erroneous record in your foundation data, and later on when an end user, when the business user is trying to create a transaction, that is when it will point to wrong conversion data. So that is the reason we are trying to enforce maximum business validation also in this phase. This becomes more important, especially when your batches are running. If there are errors that is pointing to a foundation conversion issue, then it actually consumes a good amount of time, which can impact your batch run window. So this is the phase where I'm running the business validation. Okay, I click on load. So what this does is it runs you through the business validation, and the successfully validated records are loaded from the staging tables on the conversion environment to the main RMS schema. Okay, so over here, among my 98, I started with 98. There are around 7 failures, and the only 91 in my file has made it to the final list. So going below, the errors are reported. So all these 3 screens have the same option, export to Excel. You can download fail data. This will extract out only the fail data pertaining to this layer. So in my case over here, roll number 88, buyer is incorrect. I have not loaded this particular buyer over here. The group number specified is incorrect. So you can traverse through these errors and look back onto your source, either the source files or your source systems, and then appropriately make corrections and reload them. There's another option called as skip business validation. So where this comes to use is mainly during your later cycles, when you have run through multiple iteration of the same cycle, you're pretty sure that your data is all fine. In that case, you don't want to put it through the business validation. You want to do a direct table to table, staging table to RMS table load. In that case, you can click on this, which will skip the business validation. But what I'd like to call out also over here, this is not it is not available for all entities, especially the entities which require the load to multiple tables. So this comes to picture only for entities where there is a direct table to table load. So here we also have an option to do an internal refresh. So in case your files have larger volumes of data, especially when it comes to transactions, you need not monitor the entire conversion if it is taking time. What happens is okay, I'll continue. Could you please mute if anyone is unmuted? Okay, so what happens over here is when it's a larger volume of data, it tries to run it in parallel by spawning threads and making it into chunks. At this junction, the entire process is pushed onto a background job where it runs asynchronously. So you can click this refresh button over here and see the progress as and when it moves ahead. So this is the third layer, which is the business validation layer. So in my case, I have loaded this data. The next step for me, my statistics say that it has loaded, but I would need to verify whether it has actually made it to the RMS schema. So how can I verify that? Earlier, before we had the Apex data viewer, we had a screen called as view upload data. This is again a UI on the same application through which you can see, or a more convenient way from the version 16030 onwards, we have the Apex data viewer enabled on for the RMS schema. Since we are loading this data into the RMS schema, we can, I don't have the Apex schema, I'm directly verifying this on my SQL developer. So the Apex schema, for the ones who have not seen it, Apex UI data viewer, it has a UI which is somewhat similar to a SQL developer. So easily you'll be able to write queries and see your result. So these were the same records which I have loaded, and these have been loaded just now. So this is how you verify whether what you've loaded has actually made it into the main RMS schema. So for the initial phases of your conversion, you would want to load them file by file. There is a very high chance that that a good number of errors can be encountered during your initial load, and it will take a couple of iterations to get these files sanitized. So in these cases, you would be using these individual file loads. Now, when you have progressed through multiple conversion cycles and you have your data file sanitized to a good extent, you could do a bulk upload of multiple files at one shot. For this, we have the screen called that mass upload. So what it does over here is it gives you an option to load all the files together. I would need to push all my files, all possible files, onto my SFTP to the host machine, then use the all option and then kickstart the mass upload. Initially, we would still recommend going group by group. So over here, you can do group by group. So what happens is, in case there is an error in your very first file, and then you you try to load everything together, then all subsequent files will encounter failure. So it becomes very complicated to debug and go back to it. And it sort of runs in a continuous fashion. So it will take time as well for the process to complete. So a better option would be to do it group by group. So you choose the group, give a description, and click on mass upload. The tool automatically picks up the files which match the respective pattern for each entity, and also it has the knowledge to sequence your files accordingly based on the dependencies. So this again runs in background mode, asynchronously it runs. So if you have large volume to load and it can take time, you need not sit and monitor over here. You can come back, use the search screen. Let me just open an earlier load which I had done. This will give you a picture of how the screen looks like. So I tried to load a set of core entities. So this will give me the status whether I've completed, in progress, or some unexpected failure has occurred. The number of files processed, the start and end time. Here, there are again 3 phases. This gives me the overall status of how each file has performed. Let's just take one case. So this is my banner channels which I've tried to load. It required a zip file. Status is complete, and in each phase, though it is a single button click, it still takes you through these 3 phases. What happened in each of these phases? Records and file, records got loaded, how many failed, how many went through each of the phases, how many got loaded into the main table. The entire set is available over here. And how do I see the errors for all this? The corresponding child tables below will report the errors in each phase. So in the particular banner channels that I'd selected, you just need to reselect for the file that you want to check. There were no import errors, there were no validation errors, but there were business validation. I had tried to load something which was already loaded, and these are reported over here. So to extract this error, similar to the other screens, we have the export option. We also have the download failed data option to extract only that specific data, similar to the other screen. And overall, we also have these two options. So what this does is, download errors will give me a cumulative error of all the files and all the stages. I will be getting an CSV file of all this. If the file is too large for download because of the download limitations, then it would be pushed onto your FTP port from where you can gather it out. The other option over here is download failed data. So similar to how you had seen at the single entity where I can pull out one failed set alone, this will give me a zip of all such failed files and internal zip of one more set. So that can be used. You can manually make correction and push it again. So this was the mass upload screen. Apart from this, we have this is the administration screen with restricted access. Why that is needed is because of this feature called as mock. So in conversion, generally conversions are run through multiple cycles. So you would want to perform an entire conversion, then clean the whole thing and again start. So for this, you would just need to click this button. What happens then is all your conversion data would be cleared. All data in RMS even need not be the data that is loaded only through the tool. It can be some data that you have tried to load through the induction process in RMS, or you manually loaded these data. All this gets cleared and the instance is brought back to the seed level. By seed level, what I mean is how it would have been provisioned, that is the install data alone. But at the same time, we are not clearing some of the configuration tables like the system options, the RPM system options, pricing system options. These tables are not cleared, so you need not do a second round of configuration for each and every cycle. So that is the mock feature. Apart from that, this is the generate template option. This, as I had shown earlier, would give you a zip of all the templates which call out the structure for all the entities pertaining to the version of the tool and merchandising application you are on. So another additional scheme that would be coming out is the entity sequence list. So this basically gives you the grouping of the entities. This is also covered in the documentation. What entity belongs to which group, what is the sequence in which it needs to be loaded, and these, if it's a zip, what are the internal files that it would require. The file pattern, all this is available in this screen. This is what I had to cover from the demo perspective. So Amy, you could take it forward.
Sure, thanks, Megha. That was great. If you want to stop sharing, then I can pick up and just go through the last couple slides. And I know we've got a lot of questions rolling in here too, so probably want to get to those as quickly as we can.
Yes, Amy, I've stopped sharing it.
Great, thank you. Let's see, why not? There we go. Okay, so just a couple last things, and then we'll switch over to the questions. So once the data conversion tool, once you're done doing your conversion, there is a process where it can be cleaned up and removed from the pre-production environment. So if it's no longer needed, that's something that's done in coordination with the cloud operations team. And also as part of the lift and shift, they do some kind of cleanup in both the conversion, or sorry, the pre-production merchandising schemas as well as the production schema, just to clear things like, integration staging tables, batch logs, anything that was to kind of reset it and get it ready for that go live. That's part of their standard lift and shift process. They also take a backup, re-enable triggers, things like that get turned off during that lift and shift. A couple things that we've heard commonly, what if I need to convert data that isn't currently supported in the conversion tool? I mentioned this already a bit. This is definitely an area that we're continuing to look at opportunities for future functionality. But at this time, if it's not supported in the conversion tool, then the suggestion is to look at other ways that data can get imported into merchandising, which might be, using some of our spreadsheet uploads, looking at some of our APIs, or you also have the opportunity to build scripts that can be loaded using the read-write access to the pre-production environment. Another question we commonly get is lift and shift process. How long does that take? I talked to our cloud operations team and they said generally it's been taking about 5 to 6 hours to do that part of the process. So in terms of planning out that portion of your final cutover. Additionally, if you're looking at any kind of phased implementation and you need to have a copy of production to start from in that final conversion run, that same lift and shift, but now from production back to the dev environment to kind of load that starting point, it would be, I think, a similar time frame. Another question that's come up a few times is, can I choose what tables are included in the lift and shift or that export from pre-production into production? There is a standard list of tables that the cloud operations team excludes. A lot of the seeded data that's set up in advance in merchandising, for example, on kind of as part of our platform, sometimes referred to as the RAF tables. Materialized views, temporary tables, things like that are automatically excluded in the lift and shift. But other things can be requested. For example, we've had some customers who have requested to have any RISA rules and totals that they've set up in pre-prod not be migrated as part of the lift and shift. And that happens in a separate process. So that is something that you can work out with the cloud operations team. Also, we talked a little bit about this in the last session, but any user role duty privilege configurations are also not part of the lift and shift. But we talked about how that would work by exporting the pre-prod configuration and importing the production configuration, if that makes sense. You may not have a configuration in your pre-prod environment that you want to import. Last slide then is just some references. I'll keep this up while we talk questions, but there are a couple of good guides. Most everything we talked about today has gone into more detail in the merchandising conversion implementation guide. And then we also have a lot of detail on other kind of key implementation information for each of our products. I've got the links here for merchandising and pricing specifically, since that's primarily what we were focused on today, but there are guides for each of our cloud services, as well as one for trade management and sales audit, which are part of the merchandising foundation cloud service.
Amy, you guys ready for questions?
Yeah, let's start with the questions.
Okay, so this kind of goes back to, I think, slide 10. Someone asked if the data conversion tool has a name.
If the data conversion tool has a name? Yeah,
and that was, I think you were speaking on slide 10.
Okay, it does. It's just data conversion tool, though.
Okay.
If it's a conversation with our cloud operations team, if they request the data conversion tool, they'll know what to do.
Okay.
Yep.
So this is about the demo. There was a question: any special character limitation, and what is the workaround?
Right. I saw a couple of questions on that, and in particular, I think there's another one that asked about it in terms of special characters for languages other than English. I don't believe there's any limitations on that. Mega, do you have any comments on that or any concerns to raise?
I think we are supporting them. I think we did a few tests with Chinese characters. It was loading. So basically your DAT files, you'll need to change the format and you will need to have it supported. So once you have it on your DAT files, the internal file reader is a Java-based file reader. So it's configured to read your character set, and it was able to proceed. So I think the answer would be yes.
Great, yeah. And, in terms of limitations, then it's just what the limitation would be of the database, right? So if it's a 20 character field, it needs to fit inside that 20 character limit. I'm sure that was obvious, but. just point that out too.
Okay. What character encodings are supported? Does that kind of go along with the same question, or?
I think it would be the same ones that we support as part of the base product. So we support 19 languages, including Arabic, and Chinese characters. Obviously, as Mega said, we're tested as part of the tool, so they should all be supported.
Okay. And then, do you have any templates in CSV format?
Yeah. Go ahead, Mega.
Yeah, templates are not provided in CSV formats. The templates are in that description format. So from an earlier implementation, what I saw was the implemented. So these CSV format, I think it would be convenient when they need to run the mapping cycle. So the implementation, the SI partner had they had taken up the task to read through this and accordingly prepare it either in Excel or a CSV and then run it through their mapping process.
Okay. And then a couple other questions. How to address big DAT file sizes?
I think I have a question here. So for this, do we have to do manually?
Yeah, keep it in the chat line. I tell you why, because we're probably going to have time to get to everything, but what we can do is, we can record it and then we'll try to get the answer. And when we send you the replay, we can include it in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So for larger DAT files, there are some limitations. There's some notes in the conversion implementation guide around that, but I think you can break them into multiple files. So if you had a very large department file, like we were using in our example, or probably more likely your item or item location files, they can be broken into multiple DAT files, and there's a naming standard that's used for that. If it's a larger file, I think, is it a two megabyte file limitation, Mega?
Yes, something around that, because again, it depends on number of columns that come into picture. And the first two stages can go through fine. During business validation, depending on your entity, an item has a lot of validation, so it can slow down over here. So depending on that, at the smaller file, it can process better.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Does the tool handle CFAs whenever they are set up for specific customers?
I think for some entities, we have included the CFAS tables in our custom flex attribute tables in the scope. So the details of that will be in the guide in terms of which tables are supported for that.
Okay.
Same. I think there was a question on translation tables as well. That is also supported for, I think, all the entities where we have that are part of the tool. They also have their corresponding translation tables included.
Okay, and then what kind of validations are done? Are they at the database level?
So like Mega was showing, there's kind of 3 levels of validation. The first one is, can it get loaded into the staging table? So does it exceed the size of the entity, or is it an invalid data type, right? The second is against the primary keys and constraints of that particular table. And then the third one is the business validation that is generally similar to the validation that would be done within the merchandising solution. So for item, it's going to validate all the data for that item is valid and has the right referential integrity and has other valid values for the type of item it is, for example.
Okay. Are there a rule defined for file names? And it seems that each comma is separated by, or each column is separated by a comma. What happens when the value column having a comma? I don't know if you understand that or not.
Yeah,
Right.
Do you want to answer that one, Megan?
Yes, we had called this out on our conversion guide also. So we would, if a description field might have multiple commas over there, you would be using escape characters. This is detailed in our conversion guide in such scenario how to go about with building the data files. And the file name is called out in our documentation. It's there even in the templates and also in the new screen that would be coming out.
Right. Yeah, there is a yep. So
no, I was just mentioning that we're coming up on the hour. Do you guys, Amy, do you want to stay on the line and answer the rest of the questions, or do you want to conclude the call and just answer them and send out the responses later?
Why don't we try to get through a few more if we can?
Okay. All right. Will the tool support data deltas? So, for example, the case of a customer going live with only a certain number of stores and decides to go for the rest of the stores in a few months afterwards,
So that one is complex. It can be done. Right now, though, it is a full override of the schema during the lift and shift. So if you want to do that approach, that's where I was mentioning with the lift and shift from production back to the development environment as part of the overall conversion process. So you'd have to, get a cut of your production data, get it into the conversion environment, run your conversion processes all the way through, and then reload that into production, so that you don't lose any of your production data. So it gets more complicated. It's definitely something that Megan and I have discussed in terms of how we could improve the processing to make that simpler. But right now, that's the process that would need to be followed.
And where are the rules defined? Is that in the database? And can you add more rules?
Rules or roles?
Yes.
Rules. Okay.
Yeah.
So the rules, a lot of them are in the database. So Mega showed the file template where it had a lot of the check constraints and valid values for the various columns. You can certainly look at the database or the data model to help with that. Other documentation around merchandising in terms of how you set up items and things like that are found in various sources, including the implementation guides. In terms of adding rules, no, that's not possible. So we do our basic validations that we have in the database for RMS in terms of what RMS requires. If you have additional rules over and above that, I guess I would recommend putting those in the extract and transformation programs that you're building to kind of stage up those DAT files.
Okay. And then can you create new templates and define them in the system?
No, that's not supported. So that's where if there's data that's not supported as part of the overall process, that's where I was mentioning that there are options that will need to be looked at. So you can look at using some of our spreadsheet upload capabilities or APIs that we may have, or maybe something where you need to write a custom process that can be run in that read-write environment.
Okay. Yeah, and what about reanalyzing tables and building indexes for Apex and high volume tables during conversion to increase performance? Is that allowed?
So we don't allow the tables to be modified in the pre-production environment. I think, Mega, I don't know if you want to kind of reiterate the point you made around some of the threads and chunking.
Yeah, we have. Yeah. Correct. We do have a few chunking and multi-threading to speed up the performance, but in case you see that the tables are not analyzed, it's been along. The cloud operations team do have a predefined process of a regular process of analyzing these tables. They know the voluminous tables. We do also have sometimes triggered through batches as well. But in case you see there is a need to analyze such a table, the statistics are outdated, then you can always raise a ticket with the cloud operation team and they would be doing it for you. But the direct access to do this will not be available. Yeah.
It's something that we're continuing to work on refining, I think, and tuning in terms of performance. So it kind of is, and it should be, hopefully if you take nothing else away from this session, the fact that we expect data conversion to be iterative and have a number of trials to make sure that when the final cutover happens, it goes as smoothly as possible. That's kind of how the tool is built and our general assumption.
So Amy, we have probably 10 more questions. Would you like just to conclude, and I'll capture these questions and we can send out the answers when we send out the replay link? Does that work for you?
That's fine, yes.
Okay. So anyone that asked a question that didn't get answered, we will get those answered. I'll capture all of those, send that out when we send the replay link out to you folks. And we want to thank you for joining. Thank you for your questions. We look forward to our next session, which I believe is in 2 weeks. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Good day.
Thank you.